Arizona Territory, 1879. The midday sun scorched the red dust of the high desert as a lone rider cut across the flatlands west of Camp Verde, his silhouette sharp against the jagged cliffs rising in the distance. Quinn Talbot rode quiet, steady, his eyes scanning the horizon not for danger, but for a woman he had not seen in 5 years, a woman who had once looked at him like he was the only man on earth, before she vanished. He found her in a way he had not expected. She was cornered. Her back was to a wagon, skirts torn, hair wild, a rifle held low but ready. 2 men stood 10 feet off, circling like coyotes, their voices low and coaxing. "You do not own me," she said flatly, her voice loud and clear in the dry air. One of the men chuckled. "You are out here alone, Francis. You do not have a choice anymore." Quinn's horse let out a hard breath as he stopped atop a nearby ridge. He dismounted in one swift motion, boots hitting the dirt in a cloud of dust. The men turned too late. "Step away from her," Quinn said, voice calm but sharp enough to cut granite. The men froze. One reached for his belt. Quinn's revolver was out faster than the man could blink. "Try me." They backed off, muttering, but he never took his eyes off them until they were mounted and riding hard in the opposite direction. When it was quiet again, he holstered his gun and turned to her. Francis Booker stood breathing hard, cheeks flushed from heat and fury. "I had it handled." Quinn nodded once. "I know." She looked older now, not in years but in weight. Not the kind of weight you see, but the kind you carry. Her eyes settled on him, and something in them flickered, like a door cracking open. "You always show up when I'm in trouble," she said. "I tend to ride where I think you might be," he answered. She turned back toward the wagon, where 2 small children peeked out from behind a stack of blankets. The girl was maybe 6. The boy, 4. "My children," Francis said. "Grace and Gideon." Quinn's face did not change, but his jaw tightened slightly. "They were left to me," she went on. "Their father was a man I did not love, and he loved them even less. He left one morning, never came back." Quinn looked at the children, then back at her. "You need a place to stay. I need land, my own, and no man standing over me thinking I owe him for helping. I am not here to own you, Francis," he said, stepping closer. "I am here to see you safe." She studied him, trying to read what sat behind his words. "I do not want to be owned," she said. Quinn's voice was quiet now, but steady. "Then be loved instead." She looked away. "You think that is easier?" "No," he said, "but it is real." She was silent for a long minute. The wind picked up, stirring her hair around her shoulders. Grace crawled out from the wagon and clung to her mother's skirt, wide-eyed and silent. Quinn crouched down. "Hello there." Grace blinked up at him, clutched tighter to Francis. "She does not talk much," Francis said. "She does not need to," Quinn answered softly. "She already understands more than most." Francis hesitated, then said, "I was headed toward Prescott. They are offering land to widows and women with children. 5 acres. You will not make it alone. I have made it this far." He nodded. "Then let me ride with you the rest of the way." She stared at him, her jaw set, but then her shoulders dropped, just slightly. "All right." They traveled slow. The wagon was old, the horse tired, the children restless. Quinn rode beside them, quietly fixing things without asking, tightening the wagon wheel bolts, patching a torn canvas flap, hunting for rabbits when the food ran low. He never asked Francis for more than she offered. But each night, when the fire crackled low and the children lay curled beside her, she found herself looking across the flames at him, wondering what might have been if she had not run so far, so long ago. One night, near the banks of a narrow creek, Quinn handed her a tin cup of coffee and sat beside her. "You left," he said, not accusing, just true. I had no choice. You had me. I had a future I did not understand, she said. And I was afraid. He nodded. Are you still? She stared into the fire. Not of you. They did not speak for a while. The fire popped. A coyote howled in the distance. Frances leaned forward, elbows on her knees. You should know something. All right. I never stopped thinking about you. Even when I was married. Even when he was cruel. You were always there. Somewhere in the back of my mind. He looked over at her, slow and steady. Then let me stay in the front now. She laughed, soft and disbelieving. You always did say things like that. I mean it. She looked at him then, really looked. Do you want this, Quinn? Me, 2 children, a patch of dry land, and no promises of anything easy. Yes, he said. Because I want you. She did not answer right away, but her hand moved across the space between them and settled lightly on his. It was enough. The next day they were back on the trail. The sun beat down, and the wagon creaked, and the children sang nonsense songs in the back. Frances rode up front, reins in hand, head high. Quinn rode beside her, and for the first time in years, she did not feel alone. They reached the thumb of pine-scrubbed hills south of Skull Valley by the 3rd afternoon. The air sharpened there, cooler and edged with the scent of juniper. The wagon moved slower on the incline, and Quinn walked beside it, his hand steady on the yoke when the wheel caught ruts or stone. Frances held the reins with a firm grip, her knuckles pale, but her mouth set with a kind of quiet drive he didn't interrupt. Grace dozed curled against a sack of flour. Gideon was awake, peering out from the wagon's edge, watching Quinn like he was still trying to decide what he was. Does he ever speak? Quinn asked, not looking up. Frances kept her eyes on the trail. Only if he trusts you. Quinn gave a slight nod, brushing dust from his hat brim. That's fair. Later, they stopped near a stand of cottonwoods, their roots drinking from a shallow creek. Frances unhitched the horse, rubbed her hands down its withers, and said nothing as Quinn gathered fallen branches. She watched him from the corner of her eye, the way he tested each limb before breaking it, as if even would deserved a kind hand. She stepped over to the fire ring he'd made and knelt beside it, arranging stones for the cookpot. I've got seedlings, she said suddenly. Beans, corn, a few tomato slips wrapped in burlap. Been keeping them damp when I can. My uncle taught me how to plant by the moon, said it made a difference. Quinn crouched across from her, feeding tinder into the ring. You believe that? I believe you do what works, even if you can't explain why. The fire caught with a low hiss. She didn't move. You come from land people? He asked. She nodded. Northwest Missouri. Bottomland. Rich but too easy to lose when someone with more money wants it. We had to leave in '74. Flood took the house. He didn't press. She didn't offer more. Gideon wandered close, sticking his thumb in his mouth. Frances reached out and pulled him into her lap. He didn't resist, but his eyes stayed fixed on Quinn. You want to sit with me, son? Quinn asked. Gideon's brow furrowed. He clung tighter to Frances's bodice. It's all right, Frances said softly, but she didn't make him move. Quinn leaned back on his heels. He'll come when he's ready. That night, as the fire burned low and the stars blinked faint against the darkening sky, Frances sat with her legs folded to one side, her back against the wagon wheel. Her hair had come loose, a few strands plastered to her temple from the heat of the day. You ever think you'd be raising children like this? Quinn asked, his voice low. I never thought I'd have to raise them alone. He tilted his head, expression unreadable. You aren't. She looked down, brushing dirt off her skirt. That's what you think now. But what happens when it gets hard? When I'm tired and sharp-tongued, and there's no end in sight, then I'll be tired with you. And I'll still be beside you in the morning. Francis glanced over at him, studying the shadow of his jaw, the way the firelight caught the edge of his cheekbone. I don't know how to be soft with someone anymore, she said. Quinn didn't smile. I don't need soft. I need honest. She swallowed, eyes darting to the wagon where her children lay nestled in quilts. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm afraid of wanting too much. You haven't asked me for anything, he said, but I'm here just the same. They sat in quiet then, the kind that didn't ask to be filled. A breeze stirred the grass, and an owl called once from the trees. Francis shifted, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. You sleep close tonight, in case something comes. I will. She didn't respond, but her body relaxed by degrees, as if some part of her finally believed she wouldn't have to hold everything alone. Before dawn, Francis woke to the sound of water moving through gravel. She stepped down from the wagon and crossed to the creek, washing her hands and face in the cold stream. The sky was pale with early light, and her breath clouded in front of her. Quinn was already tending the horse, his back to her. I was thinking, she said, voice low in the hush. Once we get that land, I'd like to build a root cellar, keep things safe through winter. He turned, nodding. You'll have it. I know how to set stone. She crossed her arms against the chill. I can trade sewing for lumber. There's a woman in Prescott who boards travelers. She always needs mending. You won't trade what you don't have to anymore, he said. Francis tilted her head. And what do I have? You've got a man who means to help you build something that lasts. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away. And when she stepped past him toward the wagon, her hand brushed his. It was deliberate, and it was enough. The road into Prescott curved through a canyon of pale stone and weathered pine, the sun rising slow behind them as the wagon clattered over the last stretch of packed dirt. The town was waking shopkeepers sweeping porches, a blacksmith stoking his morning fire, the smell of yeast and coal drifting down the narrow street. Francis pulled the horse to a halt beside the land office, her shoulders squared, her mouth set in a line that meant she intended to walk in alone. Quinn stepped down from his saddle, tying off his reins to the post. You want me to wait here? I need to sign my own name, she said, voice even. I didn't ask to do it for you. She met his eyes. Then wait with the children. He nodded. No argument, no press. Just stood by the wagon, watching Grace braid a scrap of yarn into her doll's hair while Gideon tugged at the hem of his coat. Inside, the land office was cool and dim. Francis stepped up to the counter and gave her name. The clerk, thin and red-nosed, pulled a ledger from beneath the desk and slid it toward her. You've got children? He asked, peering over his spectacles. She placed her hand on the page. 2. Good. Territories offering parcels to widowed mothers. 5 acres south of Granite Creek. Land's rocky, but there's water. I'll take it. He dipped his pen, scratched her name into the register, and pushed the deed across. You'll want to stake it soon. Boundaries are marked, but folks don't always respect lines unless you're standing on them. Outside, Francis held the paper in both hands, staring down at the black ink that spelled out her claim. Quinn looked up from where he knelt by the wagon. Well? He asked. She didn't speak, just walked to the backboard, lifted Grace into her arms, and held her close. Then she handed Quinn the deed. He read it, one brow lifting slightly. You've done it. No, she said. We've done it. That evening they reached the edge of the land. It sloped gently eastward, with a stand of ponderosa pine along the far ridge and a trickle of water threading through a narrow draw. The grass was short and yellowed, but there were signs of deer, and the soil turned dark beneath Quinn's boothiel when he tested it. Frances climbed down, her eyes sweeping the open space. "I want the house there," she said, pointing to a rise near the creek. "Close enough to the water, but not where the spring runoff'll take it." Quinn nodded. "We'll need stone for the base. I saw a quarry 2 miles back. I'll trade my last quilt for a wagon load." He glanced at her, something quiet in his face. "You'll have better than trade. I'll haul it." She didn't reply, just started pacing off the footprint of the house, counting her steps in the dirt. Grace and Gideon ran ahead, chasing each other in circles, their laughter sharp against the hush of dusk. Later, they sat beneath the wagon canvas, wind whispering through the grass. "I used to think I'd live near trees," Frances said, breaking off a piece of bread for Gideon. "But this open sky, it feels like breathing after too long underwater." Quinn leaned back, resting one arm across his knee. "You ever think about what comes after the house is built?" She looked over at him. "Not until now." "I've been thinking," he said slowly. "Once the roof's on, we could plant winter barley, maybe oats. You'll need feed for the horse come December." "We," she said. "You said we." "I mean it." She studied him across the small fire, her face unreadable. "You mean to stay?" "I mean to build with you, not beside you, not nearby. With you." She looked at her hands, the fingers chapped from rains and wash water. "You still don't know what I'll be like when I'm tired and frustrated." "I'll find out. I might not be kind. I'll be kind enough for both of us." She looked up then, and something in her face shifted. Not softened, she was never soft, but opened. She reached across the space between them and touched the edge of his coat. "You'll sleep inside," she said. He held her gaze. "When the roof's up? When the walls are framed?" "All right." They didn't speak again that night. But when she lay down beside Grace and Gideon, she didn't roll to face the wagon wall. She lay on her back, eyes open, watching the stars. And Quinn, only a few feet away, lay the same, the space between them no longer empty. They built the house one beam at a time. Quinn hauled stone from the quarry at first light, while Frances shaped the foundation with a borrowed shovel and the sharp edge of a flattened spade. Grace carried smooth rocks in her apron pockets, dropping them into neat piles near the trench. Gideon, still wary, stayed close to his mother, but once, when Quinn's back was turned, he offered him a broken horseshoe he'd found near the creek. Quinn accepted it without a word, tucked it into his saddlebag, and nodded once. That was enough for Gideon for now. Each evening, they sat under the half-framed rafters, eating from the same tin plates. Frances boiled beans with wild onion and whatever meat Quinn had brought back, a hare once, a grouse another time. She never asked where he went or how far he rode. He never offered. But he always returned before the sky dimmed, and his saddle always bore something useful: rope, nails, a bolt of calico from a trading post 4 miles east. Near the end of the second week, Frances stood back from the half-raised wall and exhaled. Sweat had dried in streaks on her arms, and her palms had blistered in 2 places where the handle of the mallet had rubbed raw. "We'll need a chimney," she said, brushing loose dirt from her skirt. "I won't cook over an open fire through winter." "I can set a flue with dry mortar," Quinn replied. "But we'll need to trade for the pipe. I know a man who sells scrap up near the sawmill. He took a shine to the children. I think he'd part with it for less than it's worth." Quinn adjusted the beam resting on his shoulder. "You trust him?" "I trust what I see in his eyes when he watches Grace. It's kindness, not taking." Quinn didn't respond right away, but stepped forward, sliding the beam into place atop the frame. His shirt clung to his back, and sawdust clung to his forearms. Frances handed him the hand drill without speaking. Later, after the sun dipped behind the ridge, she found him standing at the edge of the field, looking northward. His hat was in his hand, and the wind tugged at the ends of his hair just enough to make him look younger than he was. "You're quiet tonight," she said, stopping a few feet behind him. "I was thinking about Texas," he said. "My brother had land like this, hill country. He never got to build on it." She stepped closer. "What happened?" "Fever in 75. Took him and his wife. Left their place to dry out under the sun." He didn't look at her, but she saw the way his fingers curled around the brim of his hat. "Did you raise their children?" she asked. "There weren't any." He turned to her then, eyes steady. "I've never had a family," he said. "Not one that stuck." She didn't answer, but her gaze didn't falter. "There's a room in the back corner," she said. "It's small, but it'll face the morning light. For me. For you, if you want it." His voice dropped. "Is that where you want me?" She crossed her arms, not in defiance, but to still her hands. "I want you where you'll stay. I'll stay where you let me." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Then, after a moment, she said, "I've never asked a man to stay. Not before. Not once." "You don't have to ask," he said. "I already chose." The wind rose then, stirring the grass. Francis looked out across the clearing, the half-framed house, the children rolling a barrel hoop near the wagon, the creek glinting silver in the fading light. "I want the roof finished before first frost," she said. "It will be. And I want the porch wide enough for a rocker." He smiled just a little. "You plan to sit still long enough to use one?" She arched a brow. "I plan to try." That night, she didn't wait for him to settle on the ground. She laid a second quilt beside her own and nodded toward it. No words, no hesitation, just space made. Quinn laid down beside her, not too close, but close enough. In the dark, she whispered, "I don't want to be owned." He didn't move. "Then be loved instead." She reached for his hand beneath the blanket. Their fingers met, rough against rough. She didn't let go. By mid-October, the roof was on and the chimney stood firm against the wind. The house held to the earth like it had always meant to be there, stone-rooted, timber-backed, and wide enough to hold 4 lives without crowding. Frances laid the last plank of the porch floor herself, her palm pressed flat against the wood as if to seal it in place. The children had taken to sleeping inside days earlier, curled in the back room with quilts piled high. Quinn had not asked about the room he'd been offered. He simply moved his saddle roll in one morning and hung his hat on the same peg as hers. That first night inside, they lit a lantern and sat quiet on the edge of the porch, the air sharp with pine and the distant scent of smoke from someone else's fire. Frances folded her arms over her knees and looked toward the dark line of hills. "You ever think about what kind of man you'd have become if the world had given you different things?" she asked. Quinn leaned back on one elbow. "I used to, before I stopped waiting for the world to offer anything." "You think that's what I've been doing? Waiting?" He turned his head toward her. "No, I think you've been surviving." "That's different." She was quiet a moment. Then, with a voice low but steady, she asked, "And now?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "Now you're building." Frances pulled her shawl tighter. "I don't know yet how to be with someone who doesn't expect me to pay for their kindness." "I don't need paying," he said. "I just need to be let in." She stared down at the boards beneath her feet. "You're already here, Quinn." That night, they lay together in the back room, quilt pulled up to their shoulders. His hand rested at her waist, hers against his chest. No words passed between them. There was no need. Weeks passed. Frances planted wintergreens in rows near the creek, straw mulched and watered with care. Quinn traded labor for a second horse from a rancher west of town, a small, strong mare with a calm eye and even gait. He gave it to Frances without ceremony. "You'll need her come spring," was all he said. She nodded once, fingers brushing the animal's neck. "She's mine. She's yours." Grace took to reading by lamplight, tracing the words with a fingertip as Francis sat beside her, mending a torn hem. Gideon, quiet but watchful, spent more and more time shadowing Quinn, watching him split wood, studying the way he checked hoofs, mimicking the way he led the animals. One morning, Francis stepped out to find the boy tugging his own rope halter around a stump, nodding seriously to himself with every step. Quinn knelt beside him and tied the end properly without a word. Francis watched from the doorway, her hand resting lightly on the jam. That evening, as they shelled beans by the hearth, she said, "He follows you. I see that. You okay with it?" Quinn looked over, his hands still. "I'd be honored if he did." She didn't speak again for a long time. Then, quietly, "He never had that before. He does now." A hard frost settled in early November. Francis kept the fire banked through the night, rising at dawn to warm the room before the children stirred. She moved through the house with purpose, but not urgency, her steps sure. One night, while the wind howled outside and snow hissed against the shutters, she turned to Quinn as he stoked the fire and said, "I never thought I'd feel safe again." He sat back on his heels. "Do you now?" She nodded. "Not just safe, rooted. Like I belong." "You do." Francis crossed the room, her fingers brushing the edge of his sleeve. "I want to marry you, Quinn." He looked up, his face still, then softened in a way she hadn't seen before. "I'd marry you tomorrow, but not because you need a name or a claim. Only if it's what you want." "It is," she said. "Not because I need it, because I want it." They were married in a tiny clapboard chapel by the edge of town. The preacher was missing 2 front teeth and blessed them with a voice that rasped like corn husks. Francis wore a gray wool dress she'd sewn herself. Grace carried a handful of wild sage. Gideon stood solemn beside Quinn, his hand tucked in the crook of Quinn's arm. Afterward, they rode home together, the sun dipping behind the hills, the air clean and cold. Francis rode her mare, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the little house ahead. Quinn reached for her hand as they came into the yard, fingers lacing with hers as easily as breath. That night, with the children asleep and snow beginning to fall again, she stood at the window and looked out over the land. "You think they'll remember this?" she asked. Quinn came up behind her, sliding an arm around her waist. "They'll remember the warmth, the full plates, the steadiness." She turned in his arms. "And us. They'll remember love. That's all that matters." Years later, the house still stood weathered, solid, and full. The children grew taller, surer. Grace rode her own horse by her 8th year, and Gideon took over the evening chores without being told. Francis taught letters to half the valley's children from the front room come winter. Quinn built a second barn when the cattle herd doubled. But none of it ever outshone that first season, that slow, careful weaving of lives into something stronger than what either had known alone. And every night, long after lanterns were blown out and boots set by the door, Francis lay beside Quinn with her head tucked beneath his chin, his arm around her, their breaths rising and falling like the wind outside. Steady, quiet, together. They never left. They never needed to.